The research contribution that higher education has made is very substantial in terms of influencing policy, in terms of facilitating planning, and in terms of developing teachers, and in terms of curriculum development and nationalization in the positive sense of educational sector in the post-independence period in most of the ex-colonial countries.
The HEEFA movement really was seen like it is education for all in basic education and not in higher education. And therefore, practicing university education, teaching the teachers was seen like this is not supposed to be part of the university curriculum. It's part of other sectors like primary and teacher primary sector. And therefore, I think we lost 15 years opportunity for university to come in and engage with the other major sectors that were really looking at education, curriculum development and practice.
In terms of what we can do to change the future, I think the most important thing is that the higher education community starts to build alliances and partnerships that we've seen the primary education arena do. You have the Global Campaign for Education that has done a tremendous job within primary and to some extent secondary.
We have to move away from business as usual to business unusual. And it's a big challenge. So in terms of what can be done, we really need a lot of advocacy. We need to advocate to ensure that people take their rightful roles. We need to do strategic reorganization and expand our advocacy scope from just basic education to all levels, including higher education. So this is going to be my challenge.
Talk about right-based education or right-based approach to education. We are talking about extending democratic principles also to the education field. This has a lot of implications for those countries which are not yet really become democratic in the real sense. So therefore, the linkage between democracy and educational development is very important. In many countries, especially the countries which are not homogeneous in terms of ethnicity, religion, cultural background, etc., we do not have the capacity to address issues related to diversity. And this is more so in higher education than primary levels of education.
Currently, only 1% of the total humanitarian aid go into education. So changing those priorities, creating a narrative around education in conflict is a huge challenge going forward.
It's very, very difficult, really, when you're talking about education sector and conflict and disasters. Because I think disasters is not like flooding in Africa, because we have floods, but I think the central point that we have in Africa is conflict. Some of the issues or some of mitigation issues or practices that we have is peace-building process. But there's a difference between the policies and practice. So we really need to go into and find out how do we ensure that the policies that we are bringing on board are being practiced the right way.
E-learning is happening, but it is very slow, especially in Africa, and I think more needs to be done. And what needs to be done, I think there are issues to do with the legal framework, because in most of our countries, the legal framework would not recognize e-learning, for example. So there is need to review, for example, education acts or the constitutions. Another issue which has to be addressed is the monitoring and how to ensure quality with these e-learning platforms.
We have so many of our regions where, in Africa, for example, where we don't have electricity, we don't have infrastructure. How do we ensure that really distance is coming in, distance education is coming in, we really need to do a lot of financing, and financing means that we have a component of budgeting, and therefore there's a need for advocacy. How do we ensure that those major innovations that we have with mobile phones are really working for our education sector? And I think the higher education sector can come in to help us solve some of these issues. We are talking about maybe issues of accessibility. How can we use the mobile phones to make sure that people can access education in the remote part of the country, even as we talk about conflict and war? How do we ensure that we can reach those people? Because I know people, even in conflict areas, they still have mobile phones and they are communicating. How do we make sure that the mobile phones, that innovative item, can reach the people in terms of educating them? Positive education.
I don't think that the new technology-based is expanding higher education. It is not expansion, but it is reinforcing or improving quality, because majority of the students who are coming for these courses are the people who are coming for a second degree or for an additional degree rather than first-timers. Second point, again related to that issue, is that we have more enrollment, but very little completion rates.
I don't think we should draw a very clear dichotomy between bricks and mortar and online education. I think we're looking a lot more at blended learning. And there, I think we need to look at what does online education provide as expanded capacity in terms of providing, for example, access to the increasing number of students who go part-time, who have to work. And there are advantages to blended learning that we also should consider. I don't think we should look at it as one or the other, but somehow one that supports the other.
So I think the main thing for me is what is quality education. And the countries contextualizing this particular issue, the countries should redefine what is quality.
The education goal is an enabler for us to achieve the other 16 sustainable development goals. I think this will be very critical. And what does it mean? I think it also means that we have to move beyond the traditional skills of reading, writing, calculating. I think we now need to move towards global citizenship skills. We need to move beyond telling young people that when you are educated, you should expect to be employed. We need to move and tell them you'll get an education that will make you self-reliant without looking for a job somewhere. So I think we need to have that kind of blend.
52% of the world's population is younger than 30 years old. So we need to make this generation a more sustainable generation than the ones before us. There is a need for this. Now, how we tackle this need, I think there are different solutions to it. I personally very much see it as that there are two sides to it. There is a very theoretical side to it, which is actually embedding it into the curriculum. And then the other side to it is really putting it into action. And this is where perhaps it overlaps with the fifth question on how we can engage communities, where students put their theory to practice in communities, go out and solve local problems, sustainable problems, where students are taught critical theory and apply it to different areas.
I think we have to move away from, for sustainable development, move away from the framework of human capital. Although I am an economist, I am trained in that. One should move away from the human capital framework more to a social capital framework. The question that is to be posed is that how do we develop global citizenship? And that should be some of the ways in which interacting with multicultural, religious context, that should be the way in which one should try to train people. And also, we should try to see that education and higher education and research becomes a global public good, easily accessible to everybody, facilitating mobility within the countries and also between countries.
We need to make the students start thinking critically on how they can solve some of the issues that are found within their communities. Critical thinking, and that will take me back to the quality, how do we impact some of these issues if our definition of quality education is passing exams or giving certificates. So it needs redefining what is quality.
We need to bring the students to the community. And when we focus on the students, then I think we are going also to focus on a set of skills that the students will be able for them to deliver in the communities. I think the global citizenship skills, the critical thinking, innovation, creativity, how do we bring in an element of making the students responsible and also responsive to the needs of society.
We highlighted, I think, many challenges, and my comments are sort of out of order, out of perhaps a logical order, but they come as they came to me. I think that first one, I would say that we identified a lot of challenges, but I think we also identified some areas for where we can be satisfied with progress made. In terms of the challenges, I think we do need to and continue to need to improve dissemination of these UN agendas, because there's not just one, but this one, I think, is somewhat holistic. So I think we need to do a lot more to disseminate it, and particularly to disseminate it to higher education leaders. I think there are in every university committed individuals working at various levels in faculties, in outreach services, but we need to make certain that the leadership of the institutions also feel that this is their responsibility and that the contributions their staff and their colleagues are making are really important and need to be recognized. I think I heard still and over again that universities and higher education institutions need to break down the walls that surround them. Is a reality. So we need to really work much more to take these walls down and work with local communities, with schools, with NGOs, with governments, and with one another. And we don't, I think, do enough of that either. And even though we set ambitious targets, we need to make certain that those targets are accompanied by or with the political will to get us there. The fact that we have higher education and universities included in the SDGs is, I think, a recognition that the success of the EFA means today it is imperative to open the doors to higher education. I think that in contrast to other levels and other targets which have been formulated and well designed, the one about higher education is a work in progress, and it still needs quite a lot of work. There is some confusion about what is tertiary education, what is TVET, what is higher education, what is university. They are used somewhat interchangeably, and I think that's a weakness in the document that in our strategies and in our own IAU's work we will have to address. I think that we do need to build it as a dynamic document, not as a something that will stay on someone's desk. But we need to make the dynamism come through already at this point. But I do think that there was a general consensus to say we're happy that higher education is seen as both an enabling force and process to meet the SDGs, generally speaking, but also as a standalone priority for governments, and not a higher education that simply prepares our graduates for the world of work, but prepares our graduates to be thinking, critical thinkers, and active contributors that share democratic values, that feel social responsibility.
In the moment that we are writing down the next 15 years, at least, of the international community. So I think it's a moment that we can ask ourselves what we can do better if we look at the previous UN campaigns. It's really, I think, interesting that I can see, for example, in terms of partnerships, in terms of trying to generate a better leadership, in terms of the higher education leaders, to be more aware of those UN campaigns. So it's here. So I think we are in the right direction. A lot to do, but as Eva said, when the international community sets this kind of goals, they are very ambitious. And I think we have never had such ambition agenda. For first time in history, we are trying to put a goal that includes from the early education until lifelong learning education. So we have a very ambitious agenda. Therefore, the challenge is huge, but I think, as I said before in other opportunity, for first time we have North or South or partners, countries, together to try to sort this big challenge we have in front of us.